Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Go to strengthguild.com, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to the Iron Radio collections, and we've got new shirts and new banners for you to support the show. Everything from just a regular banner, regular shirt, to ones with sayings on them, like Lonnie's Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree shirt. And some news for you, we're going to have some contests for people who own these shirts and things. So if you support the show, we'll let you more on that later. So if you get in on these early, you can be one of the first people to win some prizes. So thank you very much. Go check out the site, strengthguild.com. Scroll down to Iron Radio Collections and support the show.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm a licensed nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
This is Phil Stevens, powerlifter, Highland Games athlete. I run Strength Guild. Do lots of cool stuff. Got a new Special Olympics kid started this week. So nice. He got elected to go to the actual Special Olympics. So next year, the Worlds. So
big time.
He'll be representing Team USA in powerlifting. So we got a year to get him ready. So
cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, associate professor at the Carrick Institute, creator of the Flex Diet certification. It opens again this week for a week, and be teaching for Rocky Mountain University again this fall.
Cool. Alrighty. Everyone, the three of us are just going to do a sort of a pre-game show, the first half, if you will. After the break, Dr. Nelson is going to interview Guillermo Escalante. He's a bodybuilder, very near pro-level bodybuilder, and he's going to kind of pick his brain about final week preparation or what it takes to become a bodybuilder or all the kinds of things that Guillermo is about. Mike and I were talking with him just a few weeks ago at the ISSN meeting over a dinner. Fascinating guy, totally destroys the, idea that you have to be either an egghead or a meathead. He's really both, and I know a lot of our listeners are both. I have one little listener mail and two studies that we're going to talk about here in the first half. Just the first one, it's actually a rating from iTunes, and I thought this was just fun. The person says here, best out there, hands down. It's like NPR for meatheads, but with an interesting injection of actual science, a rarity in today's age. These guys are a pleasure to listen to, and I'm thankful that they continue to bring the heat. So I appreciated that one, just from our iTunes review page. Because essentially that's what our news portion is, right? It's what's happening and then what's the analysis that we bring to it, I guess. Okay, I have two brief studies here to get your guys' input on this. First one, my wife sent me.
Strength and muscle sport news.
This is something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I don't think it's going to pan out into an iWatch per se, unless you can spit on your iWatch. But it says Australian scientists develop pain-free blood sugar test for diabetics. So Mike and I have talked about this over the years for a long time. Like continuous blood glucose monitoring is a thing. It gives you better data than just finger pricks, but I know a lot of people like to play with that. Phil, you've even kind of played with some of that stuff, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. What kind of blood sugar response do you have to different carbs? It says Australian scientists say that they have developed a holy grail for blood sugar testing for diabetics, a non-invasive strip that checks blood glucose levels via your saliva. So this latest test works by embedding an enzyme that detects glucose into a transistor. That can then transmit the presence of glucose, and this was described according to Paul Dastoor, D-A-S-T-O-O-R, Dastoor, professor of physics at the University of Newcastle in Australia, who led the team that created it. Since the electronic materials in the transistor are ink, the test can be made through printing at a low cost, Dastoor said. So it sounds like the electronic materials are literally printed inks, and that's going to equal some widespread, manufacturing, distribution, apparently. It says a non-invasive printable saliva test strip for diabetics is seen at the University of Newcastle, in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, in this picture. They're showing you a picture of it here that obviously we can't do on audio. It says the new test, Dastoor said, was created by chance as the scientists were working on solar cells. The project secured $6.3 million in funding from the Australian government to establish a facility to produce the test kits should clinical trials be passed. Dastoor says the technology could be transferred to other kinds of tests, including COVID-19 and allergens and even hormones. So this is very interesting, of course, because right now we have to test hormones through, even if it's in your saliva, it's a 39-step enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay where every pipette step is a, risk that you're going to screw it up and that sort of thing. But he says, I think it's going to radically change the way we think about medical devices and in particular sensors, because we can print these at remarkably low cost. Mike, I thought about you being an engineer. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like that, there's been all sorts of different ways. When I was a little bit more up to date on that with the biomedical stuff, like the MEMS technology, and just rethinking how to do sensors is not so much kind of the old school way, and the fact that they may be able to attach to other molecules in your physiology is super interesting. And I love the idea of printing stuff. Like there's been stuff now for a while about 3D printing of organs using, different cell lines and, how that might work. So it's, sounds super fascinating. I kind of hope it pans out, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to me that they can just print almost anything these days, and what that means for how quickly they can make it and how broadly they can distribute it. From Phil, I was curious, in your gym, if you could do this as simply as a, spit in your hand and dip the little sensor in it, or however this is going to be done, and you could get not just blood sugar, but hormones or other things. Do you think that's going to come into play? Would you ever use that in your gym, testing hormones or blood sugar?
I mean, yeah, it might just be for fun. Just to see what kind of reaction you get. I mean, it'd be neat to be able to finally have something easy and accessible to see, like, what happens to your blood sugar after a hard squat session, or things like that. And then what happens to it when you refeed or something, slam a freaking Gatorade 20 minutes later and things like that.
3 donuts.
Yeah, things like that. Or, seeing if there is some kind of response to training or meals or something like that, as far as, snapshot testosterone levels or something, which we all know that can be slightly meaningless. If my testosterone goes up really high for 15 minutes, really, what does it do?
Yeah.
Yeah. But things like that. But yeah, it would definitely be neat. I mean, at least check out.
I think it'd be cool to be able to look at things like, maybe you're if you're sore all the time and your aerobic conditioning sucks, maybe your blood sugars are running higher, or like maybe your cortisol to testosterone ratio is high because you're overtraining in some way. This does look like
it'd take a lot of testing. Like somebody's, this group of people is progressing, greatly. These few people aren't. Let's see if there's some kind of statistical difference there. You guys' blood sugar's way up and these guys aren't, whatever. I mean, it would take a lot of sample tests to reach any kind of inkling of an answer, right? But it'd be fun.
Well, even guys, I mean, if somebody was using any number of, performance enhancing drugs, I mean, you could be like, well, your testosterone levels are this high, you're off the scale, or you're, who knows, insulin, IGF-1, who knows. I thought it was cool because it was non-invasive. It depends on how quick and reliable it is. And again, we're doing this as a news bit, right? This is just coming from Reuters as something that might be a couple years down the road, but it seems very possible to me. And Mike, I'm sure you can back that up. I mean, all you have to do is listen to NPR, like Science Friday. They're always talking about stuff like this coming down the pike. So I think it will happen. It's just a matter of time. Oh, I'm remiss. The author last name is Bikes, Bikes, that's doing that reporting.
Anyway. I think it'd be super cool to have something like that as sort of a CGM of, hormone data and whatever else you could grab, right? So continuous glucose monitoring, which I've done a few times. I've got clients that do it once in a while. It's nice because you get relatively accurate numbers. I mean, there's a few caveats you kind of have to watch out for, but you get it with also a very high frequency. So you can see, like we talked about, responses to, training and sleep and everything else. So it'd be super interesting then from a data collection standpoint of training programs or, looking at people's recovery or whatever metrics. And I think we'll find, like with, testosterone, even cortisol and other hormones, that there's a lot more variability there than what we realize. We just, like you said, Lonnie, trying to do it now. I mean, even I think I've been trying to find a study for years that just looked at people sitting at rest, not doing anything, and just ran like testosterone numbers like one after the other, right? Just to see how variable that is just at rest without any other sort of stimulation. Mm-hmm. My gut feeling is that it's probably more variable than what we think. And to have that kind of maybe non-invasively that you can just pull onto your phone would be super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Phil makes a good point about the pulsatility of natural hormone production is going to go up and down a lot. But yeah, I mean, if you're a morning lark instead of a night owl, how does that affect like your peak blood glucose in the morning versus evening? I mean, classically, I've read that evening carbohydrate tolerance and insulin sensitivity might be poorer. And so you could kind of see, are my blood sugars running higher in the evening versus in the morning? Kind of see, this individual thing. It's, more data, as you already do, Mike. More data means more information, so long as you can kind of hone in on which data points are valuable, I suppose.
Yeah, as long as it's accurate. And, the nice part is we can get that data from a CGM right now, but the big unknown, especially as you get into closer people who are not as metabolically healthy, is what is your insulin levels? Like I said, I did a study years ago, unfortunately never got published, so a year and a half of my life that never saw the light of day. But we did the glucose numbers first because they're easy to do. Mm-hmm. And then they had to send out the insulin numbers to be done. They came back. And some people who were, a little bit high on glucose in the 120 range, these are borderline type 2 diabetics. They were okay on insulin, not great. And then some other people who are right around the same number for blood glucose, their insulin was freaking sky high, right? So I think as you get into more of a disease population, the other hormones and what's going on become even more important then.
Yepper. Okay, let's see. We have one more just to get your guys' feedback, and then we're just going to end this morning, everybody, because of the pre-recorded interview. This is just going to bring up a discussion, I think, but I'm looking at a paper in my hand from Greto, Greto, or Greto and colleagues, many colleagues on this paper from the International Journal of Obesity. Extensive weight loss reduces glycan age by altering IgG and glycosylation. What a mouthful. But essentially what they're suggesting here is that weight loss and other weight loss techniques reduce how gummed up your proteins are and therefore make you look younger, right? So just as a heads up, I was looking this morning. I started looking at a lot of papers about how carbohydrates and running glycolysis hard and fast all the time, right, from your carb intake and higher insulin concentrations, is directly related to aging. And in fact, some of those older papers from Yang, I just looked, Chaodong is one, Chaodong. They are constantly pointing their finger at carbohydrate intake speeding up aging. And I find this interesting because for years, Phil, you've done this quite separately from me and in parallel before we even talked about it. But what goes up over the course of a year in an athlete? If your protein and fat are relatively constant, it's the carbs. You want to gain weight, you plow the carbs, eat lots. If you want to cut weight, watch almost any bodybuilder. They'll cyclically or linearly reduce carbs. So you can find a lot of that stuff. Some of the newer papers on carb intake and aging, Voyer, Lee, Ingram. So if you go to the National Library of Medicine, you want to go dig around some of these authors' names on PubMed, you're going to see that I'm not making this up. This has been happening for a long time. I wrote a paper, oh my goodness, probably 15 years ago for T Nation called High Stakes, written S-T-E-A-K, like a pun, because eating a lot all the time is, linked to rapid aging. So think about our population. What do? We go after the food, especially during weight gain phases. I mean, historically so, like with Phil's plates of brownies, and they're looking at his poo because it's so dramatic and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we do what are called calorie restriction mimetics, like exercise, right? But not just, there's a time for calorie restriction, I think, in a lot of strength athletes' diets, but especially bodybuilders. But also the idea of exercising, they'll call that a calorie restriction mimetic, right? Because it's mimicking calorie restriction. So we're in a much better metabolic state than someone who's simply starving. So we eat a ton, but then sometimes we do cutting cycles, or, we always exercise. So how much does that counteract it? All that kind of stuff. Listeners, you may have heard lately, there's a Dr. David Sinclair. I think he's the chair of the biochemistry department at Harvard. And he's talking a lot about NAD boosters, metformin, right? The carbohydrate metabolism improving drug, if you will. It works by a couple of different mechanisms. I don't want to get into liver output versus muscle sensitivity right now, but he is advocating these NAD boosters, and we may have to do a whole episode on them. They're the first supplement that's come down the pike that makes me fascinated, frankly, in a long time. But he also sort of advocates intermittent fasting and amino acid avoidance, protein avoidance, and that's not going to work for us, I don't think. I mean, you have to look at which one of these things are people like our listeners, are we going to be down with, and which one we're like, no, bro, I don't want to live to be 120 if I'm, feeble, kind of thing. So anyway, so this paper, I'm just going to cut to the chase so I can get some feedback from Phil and Mike here. But it says obesity, a major global health problem, is associated with increased cardiometabolic morbidity and mortality. Protein glycosylation, so gumming up those bodily proteins, is a frequent post-translational modification, highly responsive to inflammation and aging. So we investigated whether weight loss interventions affect inflammation and aging-associated gumming up, and they were looking at a specific protein here, an immune protein. But anyway, it says they looked at these gummed up molecules chromatographically. They profiled them in 37 obese patients, and then they subjected them to either a low-carb diet followed by bariatric surgery, and they looked across multiple time points. But in a nutshell, it says low-cal diet induced a marked decrease in the level of these gummed up proteins. Bariatric surgery resulted in extensive alterations in the total profile of this. It's the IgG-N glycome, for those of you who care, and most of you probably don't. But essentially, it says altogether, these findings highlight that weight loss substantially affects the IgG glycosylation, or gumming up, resulting in reduced glycan and reduced biological age. So it's just kind of crazy to think. I think a lot of our listeners, of course, know that metabolic syndrome it's related to aging, it's related to inflammation. In fact, there's even a term that floats around in the literature, including this paper, inflammaging. It's almost like diabesity, where they're compounding these words, but inflammaging. It makes me glad that as I get older, my wife and I were always doing stuff to reduce inflammation, the usual fish oils or curcumin or whatever it might be. So carbohydrates kind of getting blamed in a way. You know, there's even papers you can find on PubMed right now about glycotoxicity and that sort of thing. So anyway, there's some names for everybody. Some stuff that's in the news a lot with that Harvard professor, David Sinclair. What do you think, Mike? Have you heard much about this? Of course, I'm fascinated by glycation because coffee might reduce it. In fact, that was one of the studies that I've had my eye on recently is, can coffee or other things that help with blood sugar control, can they reduce how gummed up you are? Because I was blown away that you can actually put your arm against certain devices. There's these AGE readers, and see how sort of reflective or fluorescent your skin is. It's non-invasive, right? So watch that become a part of a watch, you know, how gummed up you are. And how you can, if you lose weight or avoid high carbohydrate diets, some papers say if you go keto, it reduces how gummed up you are. So that's almost by definition one of the markers of aging, right? You could slow that whole process. But I've been rambling. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting. Obviously, from my bias, I just think about it in terms of lens of metabolic flexibility. I've seen some people where maybe even poked them for lactate a little bit, and their baseline levels of lactate are really high. And that indicates that you're just cranking through glycolysis pretty hard. And I think that's going to be, like you mentioned, a marker for aging, right? If I have my little Jetta, I'm constantly redlining it in order to create energy. And in the handful of those people where we've seen that, my buddy Luke Lehman has seen this too at Muscle Nerds. They have all sorts of issues. But they were, you know, in this case, a couple people I'm thinking of were relatively young too, so it wasn't older people. Sometimes on metabolic heart testing, you'll see people at rest or even during an RMR, you'll see their RER, right, their respiratory exchange ratio, which is telling you how much fat versus carbohydrates you're using at rest. Yep. You'll see that tends to be more towards the carbohydrate end of the spectrum. That gets into all sorts of stuff about, you know, overfeeding and what was their diet beforehand, and was it just a change because they are using more carbohydrates. So we know that in a healthy person, if you feed them more carbohydrates, if they're metabolically flexible, they will then try to oxidize more of those carbohydrates as a fuel. So my PhD research, we looked at a potentially non-invasive way of measuring metabolic flexibility. So we put people on exercise, just a very low intensity exercise at steady state, and then we did some variability analysis of their RER. We showed that measurement is repeatable, but unfortunately, so far, no one's actually shown if it really is a marker for metabolic flexibility or not. So my caveat with all of that is that I think if you are not so metabolically healthy, I think going to a lower carbohydrate approach, I think, is a very valid method, and that can be useful, especially if you're stuck on the carbohydrate end of the spectrum. My fear is that people who are relatively healthy without looking at any under-the-hood measurements are then going to use that as a justification to only do a low-carb method, and their performance and everything else may suffer. Because I've seen also people on very high intakes of carbohydrates. Granted, they were healthy, they were younger, they did a pretty high volume of exercise, and at rest and just kind of hanging out, they were able to downregulate and to use fat, despite having this very high carbohydrate background. So that's kind of my caveat, because, like I said, it's easy to read into this, and then we forget the difference between, you know, people who are maybe not as metabolically healthy and don't do a lot of exercise, and then it's very easy and probably not correct to transfer that to people doing, you know, 5, 6, 7 hours of exercise a week, eating a higher carbohydrate approach, and then assuming they get stuck on the carbohydrate end of the spectrum, where I've seen some of those people can still downregulate and still be able to use fat during lower intensity exercises. So they're staying more metabolically flexible. And in theory, they would kind of be better and kind of out of the woods related to this.
Right. Yeah. Fitness level is one of those control issues. My nutrition colleagues, they don't always look at that adequately. Just like on the exercise physiology side, they don't always look at people's chronic diets adequately, in my opinion. But yeah, if you're very fit, you're not going to be the same kind of person, the same kind of response. I gave a continuing medical education talk to some physicians at a local hospital, and it was basically about that, like high fructose corn syrup, the constant intake that we have these days. It's much more damaging to underfit fat people, right, than it is to fit people. And there was some really cool, like, biochemical stuff and, organ stuff that we were talking about. But I'm curious, Phil, if muscle athletes want high levels of IGF-1 and insulin, right? I mean, that's growth. I mean, but they increase aging and disease, if at least in excess. How do you look at that personally? Are you willing to age more quickly, or do you figure, no, hell with that, I'm so fit, this doesn't apply to me,
I go back to the elite athletics has nothing to do with health. And every elite athlete I know has accepted that. And it's just like a statement that's like, who cares? Like, it's like that study they did with the Olympians. Like, if there was a pill that guaranteed you won the Olympics but you die in 5 years, would you take it? And like almost resoundingly all said yes. They don't give a shit. Their goal is that. And that's how it is with most elite athletes. They'll do whatever it takes to win this goal. And then later in life, of course, like, I've changed. My outlook on everything is totally different at 44 than it was at 30, and things like that. You start getting older, it's like, oh, I got to change things or I am going to die. So, yeah, I mean, it depends on the age of the athlete and everything else. But in general, I mean, when you go to top echelon things, it's like they just do what it takes to win.
Yeah.
And then they don't care. Like, okay, so I look 5 years older. I don't care. Whatever. I don't know. You're seeing you usually don't see the health stuff until the athletes are a bit older and they're getting out of their prime and things like that. And it's like, okay, now it's time to pay attention to health. But still, at the same time, most ex-athletes, even at the strength end, if you compare them to somebody their same age, they just look younger. They're just built more fit. Yep. I mean, fitness goes a long ways. You got to add that into the health of life, and so
I think it's not just that they have structure. They literally, even facially, like, and functionally in many ways, they're just younger. Those biomarkers are. Was it Volek that did that paper about how you can reduce muscle loss of aging, the sarcopenia of aging, by like a factor of 4-fold just by resistance training as you age? Even this skinny little David Sinclair from Harvard has talked about some exercise and resistance exercise and, preserve your muscle mass. One paper I read this morning even suggested, it sounded to me almost like the opposite of what lifters do, but they say try to suppress IGF-1 and a lot of these growth factors when you're young and then boost them slightly when you're older. And I'm like, well, lifters are going to be kind of trying to jack this all the time. It's almost like your point, Mike, with redlining glycolysis all the time. Yeah. That's hard on you. In this case, I'm not talking about just glycolysis, although that too, but even the hormone levels. Because they asked him, this Harvard prof, what about testosterone or what about other things that can help maintain muscle mass? And he said, no, I wouldn't use that. It comes back to bite you in the butt in the end. I'm thinking, well, we have to pick and choose probably in our population which of these things we might do. And keto diets or cyclical diets, intermittent fasting, whatever, those might be on the table. But I don't think avoiding testosterone and amino acids are really on the table for us. So I'm trying to think of how else we do this. And exercise might be the great corrector, I guess. Yeah.
And also when media people tend to ask those questions, it's just, is testosterone good or bad? And if that's not necessarily your research area, a follow-up question would be, well, at what levels? Right? Are we talking about a low to moderate, HRT type dose, or are we talking like supraphysiologic levels? And I think people subconsciously, they go to, performance enhancing drugs and being in this supraphysiologic range for a long period of time, which I think probably does come with the cost. But like everything, it's kind of nuanced and we don't have a ton of data. And if you look at the opposite end, being hypogonadal towards the last 3 decades of your life is probably not good either.
Right. No, that's right. I'm thinking about that too. Stallone made the comments when he was trying to bring back some growth hormone from Australia. This was years ago. I remember the news. He's like, "You don't understand. It's the fountain of youth." So I think structurally, visually, it is. I mean, he got in thicker, well, arguably better shape when he was like in his 60s than even when he was very ripped, but much smaller when he was, in a lot of the action movies and stuff. But these more recent movies that he's been in, he has been ridiculously jacked and visually and structurally clearly superior, even at an advanced age. But I think, you have to contrast that sort of like what Phil's saying with, but that might come as a price, and that's just something you accept. In some ways, having more muscle looks younger. That's a biomarker of aging. But, if you take a look at his tissues, and he's very glycated and gummed up or has advanced cardiovascular disease, that's not cool. But again, we're coupling this with lots of exercise and diets that are not built around Coca-Cola and Big Macs, so.
Yeah, and I think that's, especially you start getting to GH and stuff like that, in my head, I always just wonder about what happens to, glucose mechanisms. If it's someone who doesn't exercise a lot, has a really crappy diet, giving them GH is probably going to have even more side effects. But if you're looking at someone who's, very healthy, their nutrition is on point, they're not in a massive caloric surplus, everything else is good, maybe not as much of, potential issues related to glucose metabolism and blood glucose, etc. So.
All right. Well, we should cut it there. We'll probably have an extra long episode. How long did you talk with Dr. Escalante, Mike?
Well, it was about an hour.
Okay, so large
we get a bonus episode today.
Yeah, bonus episode for everybody.
Yep, there you go.
All right, cool stuff, fellas.
Bye, guys.
We'll see you.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you know who this is. So I'm here to tell you about Dr. Mike T. Nelson's new book, Why You Should Eat Keto. I don't do it because, look at me. Come on, I'm fabulous and I'm fantastic. Anyway, you should text the Keto ebook, all in one word, to 44222 to receive your free copy. Do it now!
Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. For this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go. Okay, listeners, after more than a decade of joining us on the podcast airwaves, you can now also become viewers on YouTube. This is not our usual simple backup of the audio show, but rather a growing body of video taste tests covering various foods of interest to nutrition enthusiasts, bodybuilders, and powerlifters. From within YouTube, simply search for Iron Radio Taste Test or Nutrition Radio Taste Test. In about 15 minutes, we cover taste and texture similar to other products, usefulness to the co-hosts, and whether we would recommend the product to certain clients. You may even want to watch our podcast feed or Facebook group for which products are coming down the pike so you can taste test them with us. Join us for this new monthly project.
Weekly fix of Iron Radio. In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Hey, welcome to Iron Radio. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. Dr. Lonnie Lowry is out traveling across the country and Coach Phil Stevens is busy doing a weigh-in with some of his lifters at a meet. And today we've got Dr. Guillermo Escalante. We're going to get into his story here in just a bit. And in the topic of the day, we're going to discuss all things that go into being a top-rank bodybuilder. Even if that maybe is not your aspiration, I think it's interesting to see what goes into it, from training, time management, lifestyle, and we'll even get into drugs and other things like that. And also, we'll do a second part with Dr. Escalante on my podcast, which is Flex Diet Podcast. And there we're going to talk all about just kind of a little bit of a continuation of the topic. And in that one, we're going to discuss a great paper that he published. We can link to it in this show also, looking at different techniques to prepare for a peak week. Everything from sodium, water, carbohydrates, and possibly other ancillary drugs and things that are involved in that. So just search on your favorite podcast player for the Flex Diet Podcast. So welcome, Doctor. Thank you for being on Iron Radio.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, no problem. So yeah, give us a little bit of the backstory, because we got to hang out with you and your wonderful wife at the President's Dinner at ISSN recently. Lonnie was there too, and yeah, we just had a really fun conversation. It was a fun night, and I'm always fascinated by people who have gotten to a very high level in whatever profession, in this case bodybuilding, and then also in academics. So how did you kind of get started down that dual path?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting path. So my passion, I think, like a lot of us, just stemmed from just an interest in athletics and wanting to perform better on the field. I played football and ran track through high school and even into college. So my passion began very early, around the age of 10, 11. I bought my first nutrition book when I was 12, and I started implementing, to the best of my knowledge, different training practices and nutrition practices through high school and through even junior high school. And I really noticed a big impact that played in my ability to perform better. I wasn't necessarily gifted in a lot of genetics with athletics, but I was able to work really hard and really make up for a lot of that, and make myself actually a pretty good athlete through high school and college, and that came with just a lot of hard work and understanding the importance of that. So I started applying a lot of these practices through then. And when I went to college, I had a good understanding of and passion for the sciences and the human body. And when I realized that actually I could actually study that, I thought that was really cool. So I integrated my passion for sports and athletics and science, and I ended up getting a major in athletic training and biology minor. And that's kind of where everything started kind of coming together. So I became a certified athletic trainer right after college, a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And then I opened up my own practice. But right around that time, it was right when I finished college and was kind of didn't no longer played college sports, but I was still interested in lifting and doing the lifestyle. That's when my interest for bodybuilding was introduced to me, really. A friend of mine was a bodybuilder, and I told him that I was looking for an avenue to be able to continue to compete and have a goal to shoot for. And he said, you should try bodybuilding. So I actually went to the California State Championships through the National Physique Committee, the NPC. So it was a high-level show, but I didn't really know how it worked then. So I didn't know that none of those guys were pros. There was a guest poser, which was Lee Priest, and this was in 2000, May of 2000. And he was the only pro really that was on stage as a guest poser. But all the other competitors, which were incredible competitors, were actually just all amateurs competing to be the Mr. California. And he convinced me, my friend, to try doing a show a few months later. So sure enough, about 4 months later, I dieted down. I wasn't a very big guy. I was more, I always trained to be, maybe not necessarily bigger, but faster, stronger, more powerful. I tried to I got down to competition body weight, but I got all the way down to a bantamweight. I was just a little guy. I think I went from 160 pounds down to 141 pounds, something like that.
Oh, wow.
Not a lot of muscle, not a lot of.
And for the listeners, how tall are you?
I'm 5'5".
5'5". Okay.
Yeah. So and I always like to say I'm 5'5" with shoes on. So I'm actually like more like 5'4" on the high end of 5'4". So that was. Again, I wasn't necessarily the smallest guy, but I was not the biggest guy. I had decent symmetry, but definitely had a lot of work to do. But that's kind of what inspired my journey in bodybuilding. As I went through the process, I really enjoyed what it took and the dedication and the time, and then the science of it really intrigued me. I didn't really understand a lot of it. At that point in time, even though I had a background in physiology and anatomy and biomechanics and exercise physiology, I didn't really there was not a lot of bodybuilding knowledge specifically, and realistically, I was listening to a lot of the bro scientists, back in the day, and reading, I back in the day we used to read the Muscle and Fitness magazines. I'm sure you probably remember the Flex magazines.
Yep.
Just getting a lot of information from those sources, and always, though, in the back of my head, I was kind of questioning, well, but what's the science behind this? And I would see conflicting statements from sometimes what the bros would say to what the science would say, and just as a curious mind, I would always kind of question, like, why do they do this, or why do they do that, or why does this work, or why is this widely practiced, but it's not accepted in the scientific community? So that's where I kind of really started putting those two things together. So I competed for, that was my first competition in 2000, and my last competition was just last year in 2020. So I've been competing for literally over 20 years now, and I haven't competed every year, but I've competed on most years, and I think, I haven't counted exactly, but I think I've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 45 shows in the last 20 years. That's a lot. It's a lot. And a few of those, and they've been from all levels to the NPC, as a novice, or just the open division, and then all the way to the national level. I've done a couple of junior shows, so like the NPC Junior Nationals, NPC Junior USAs, and then I've done the NPC Nationals. And then now that when I turned 35, I qualified to be a master as well. So I've done some masters level shows as well at the national level. And I've had good success. I've won a lot of shows locally. Actually, for several years, I actually didn't lose at the local level for a long time. I would usually just use those to requalify for competing at the national level. Nationally, I've had good success as well. I would say some of my best placings, I placed second and third at the NPC Junior USAs. I have another third placement at the NPC Junior Nationals. At the USA, I placed anywhere from 7th. I've had a couple of top 15 finishes, a couple of top 10 finishes. At the Masters Nationals or Masters level, I've had a couple, I think 1 or 2 top 5, and then a couple of top 10s in there. So, and I've beaten some great guys. So actually, I would say probably my best show in terms of placing and beating some really competitive people was in 2013, when I actually, it was the LA Championships a week before the USA. And Breon Ansley, who was the men's physique Olympia, he won the light heavyweight class. I won the middleweight class, and I took second to him in the overall. But in my weight class, Danny Hesser, which actually ended up being eventually the first Mr. Olympia physique, Mr. Classic Physique Olympia in, I think, 2015 or so, 2016. He was in my weight class, and I actually beat him in the middleweight class. So I've beat some really good competitors, competed with amazing competitors, and just been, I would say, the bridesmaid very often for my pro card. And I'm still on my quest to get there. I told my wife, even if I'm 80 years old and I'm the last guy standing, I'm going to get that pro card. So, but that was actually our dinner conversation, right? Whether that's a smart philosophy, which was actually a very fun fun conversation as well.
Yeah, no, that was super fun. And I think that's weird in bodybuilding a little bit. Like if you look at other sports, right? So if we look at like American football, right? You find a handful of people in their 40s or late 30s. You're like, holy crap, those people are old, right? Where bodybuilding, there's a lot of people that are still extremely competitive into mid 30s, late 40s. I wouldn't say late 40s, but late 30s, maybe sometimes early 40s. I think just because of the timeline, I think it takes to achieve that look. Did you find that some of the Masters competitors were maybe even a little bit more competitive than what you were up against before, or not so much?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I often say that, you know, to this point, actually, my very first USA Championship, you know, I was a young kid, 25, 26 years old, I think. And I remember going to the USA Championship. So this was just the regular NPC USA Championships, top people in the country, top amateurs in the country trying to get their pro card. And I was a lightweight then, and I was cocky, you know, and I just barely nationally qualified. And we're back there for weigh-ins. And this was before the time when there were all these different divisions. It was basically just in the men, it was just bodybuilding. There was no physique, no classic physique, none of that. But so a lot of these guys were kind of bunched together. So our lightweight class was stacked. It had like over 50 guys in there. Ooh. And in the weigh-ins there, I remember just before we actually disrobed to weigh in, there were some guys, and I'm looking at their faces, and I'm like, man, some of these guys are like really old. I'm like, what are they doing here? Like, it could be like my dad. And I'm looking at these guys, and then they started taking their clothes off to go weigh in, and I'm like, Grandpa's gonna kick my ass. And now I'm the grandpa, which is actually funny because now I'm the one that's been there for a long time. And you're right, it just takes that long to really develop a physique. So when you're in your, you know, unless you started lifting when you were 13, specifically for bodybuilding, because I started lifting when I was 14, but not for bodybuilding. I lifted for sport. I didn't really start lifting for bodybuilding until I was, 23-ish or so. So even though I had a kind of a foundation, you know, I didn't have a bodybuilding foundation. So a lot of these people, I would say most guys start maybe young would be, you know, very young would be 13, 14, 15. I would say most guys start more like in their early to mid 20s to kind of start in the bodybuilding world, and some start a little bit later. And definitely, I mean, if you start at, let's say like I did, you know, at 22, 23, it's going to take you at least 5 to 10 years to really kind of bodybuilding training and a bodybuilding lifestyle to really kind of develop the muscularity that you see for some of these top level competitors.
Yeah, and what do you think some of that is? Because you can even look at like some of the just complete freaks, you know, outliers who are in their even mid-20s, you know, compared to, you know, some of the same freaks who are in their late 30s. And amount of muscle, yeah, similar. Obviously, there's going to be differences, but they almost look completely different. Like there's something about the look of someone who's been doing it for just seems like decades. It just looks a lot more dense. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, they're just in tune with their physique and their body and their physiology. Totally. And they're able to dial those things in. You know, they've led the lifestyle for a long time. They've done a lot of trial and error, and they've self-experimented. And I'm talking with everything from training practices to drug practices to nutrition practices to peaking practices. So all of those things, they have just more data on themselves, and they're able to really manipulate that. And not only that, I think some of the competitors that are really serious that are older, I mean, they lead that lifestyle, you know, not for 12 or 16 or 20 weeks before the show. They lead that lifestyle, you know, almost 365. Yeah. And I think all of those things, you know, do contribute to that. And then of course, you know, you've built that muscle over time. So it's not something that just was newly developed over time, which I think is something that I think once it's been there for a while, it's not gonna go away. As you and I know, muscle's made up of a lot of things. Water, protein, intracellular fat. So there's a lot of intricacies there. It's more than just this protein tissue. And I think, but that's what happens. I think these people that have been training a while is a lot of that muscle is actually just better quality muscle.
Yeah. And what made you go back and do an advanced degree on the education side? Was it you talked about just being super passionate and wanting to learn more, and that just sort of eventually led to an advanced degree?
Yeah, it was funny because I went through school really quickly through my bachelor's. I actually got an MBA, really quickly right after that. So I was working full time and I did my MBA. And then I pivoted. I opened up my own business. It was a sports rehabilitation, cash-based business, fitness business, and I provided athletic training services. I later teamed up with a physical therapist, and then we developed our PT practice and started doing insurance billing and all of that. And then I also, after that was going pretty well, I actually ended up investing with another business partner. I bought a world gym. And we ended up opening up another one for a few years. But right around that time, it was where business was pretty good. Everything was moving up. I just had a time where I wanted it was a personal goal to go through and get my terminal degree. So I pursued a program that allowed me to run my businesses full time, raise my family, because I have two boys. I had two boys that were young kids at that point in time, and I was able to pursue that doctor of science degree in athletic training, which was great. It was right up my alley. But I didn't go with the intent to go into academia, go into research. I did it as just a personal goal for something that I wanted to accomplish. And then as I got into the program, a few years into it, because it actually took me 8 years to complete that thing, just because I was working full time and.
That took longer than my 7 years. That's impressive.
So you know what I mean? It
was hell.
Yeah. In fact, they were saying it's like, if you don't finish this year, you're like, this is the timeline. You're done.
Yep, that's what I ran into too.
And a lot of that was actually. Part of that was as a result of not only my business and my family and all those responsibilities, but it was my stubbornness in bodybuilding, because as I finished my coursework and I was starting to write my dissertation, I would start with doing the literature review, and I would start kind of piecing things together. And then I would get, this idea that I could do both. I could both get ready for a show do my dissertation at the same time. And of course, 2 weeks into my getting ready for a show, the dissertation stuff went out the window, and then that's what happened. And I tried that 2 years in a row, and that's kind of what made me kind of spin my wheels for a while, where I was still kind of progressing toward the dissertation, but I wasn't doing what needed to be done, just because so much time went into preparing for a show. So that's when I actually told myself, hey, you're not competing until you finish your dissertation. So I took a year off in 2008, and I took a year off in 2011. And in 2011 was actually when I actually finished all my dissertation, and I defended everything. I finished everything in 2012, and then I competed a few months after that. But it was after everything was said and done. But it was in that process that I really enjoyed. I taught at a university. I got some experience there. I got to do research through my dissertation. And that's when I really found that I enjoyed the process. So when I finished the doctorate, I took a job as a part-time adjunct lecturer at my current school, actually at Cal State San Bernardino, and I just wanted to put my full body in a little bit more teaching, getting more of a teaching load, and I realized I liked it more. So then I went full in for a full-time tenure track position, and that progress over the years that way.
Oh, that's awesome. I saw a stat recently where, this could be wrong, but I think it said like 50 to 60% of people who pass their composition, right? So they start doing their defense, they're what they call ABD, all but dissertation. I think it was over half of them who even get to that point, like still never graduate? It was some crazy stat like that.
Yeah, I would believe it, because I would say I was on the verge of being one of those statistics, and it was one of those things, kind of like bodybuilding. It's like, hey, you know what? This is about discipline, and you just have to make sure you have to buckle down, and roll your sleeves up and write, and you read, and you just have to make it work, and no one's going to do it for you. So and it's always a beast to write and to make it happen. So. It's one of those things you just have to take a bite at a time. And of course, it didn't help that I was working full time, and I'd start work at 5, 6 in the morning, get home at 7, 8 at night, and then say hello to the kids for a little bit, and then at 9 p.m. Basically 9 p.m. to midnight, that's when I would write and do research. So it was brutal, but it made it happen.
Yeah, that's similar to what I went through towards the end, too, because I thought I was going to be done. Long story short, one of my studies, I spent 1.5 years doing it. They refused to publish it because we didn't, quote, find anything. So I had to go find another study. But during that time, I thought I was going to be done. So I hired a business coach, started doing more online stuff. Was still working 24 to 30 hours a week for a med tech company, got married. And yeah, the last 3 years were just excruciating.
So you've been on that same boat, and it's terrible. I mean, now I go back and I'm like, how the hell did you do that?
Right.
I can do that again.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll get into the topic of the day here of all the things that go into being a high-level bodybuilder. So we're here with Dr. Guillermo Escalante, and even if your goal is not to be a high-level bodybuilder, I think it's interesting just to get an idea, kind of a peek behind the curtain of all the things that go into it. And maybe if you do have some aspirations to do that, I think it's always good to be able to make educated decisions and have, some idea what you may be in for if you choose to go down that path. So you had mentioned in the early part of the show just about doing bodybuilding like 24/7, which to me I think is kind of one of the very fascinating things. I mean, of course, we all hear of, high-ranked bodybuilders who do things kind of on and off, but I would say for the most part, it's one of those rare sports where there's an off season, but not really, right? I mean, I even know some high-level American football players who, they have an off season, and they may take a couple months off. They're still training and do other things, but I think bodybuilding is unique from the aspect of it's kind of all-encompassing with the nutrition, the training, the sleep, the recovery, and just even your off-season, you're still not really off per se.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit right on that is, the really successful high-level bodybuilders, I mean, really practice, the lifestyle, the bodybuilding lifestyle for, 365, through holidays, through everything else. And, you can be strategic in how to do things, but, oftentimes there really is no, 2 or 3 month break when you do it. Maybe some people, when they initially start, do it that way. I know I kind of did, where I would be really focused in, for the, say, 16, 20 weeks before a show and live the lifestyle. And then I'd still be, lifting, but the rest of the lifestyle wasn't necessarily a bodybuilding lifestyle. But as I started moving up the ranks and going into the national level of competition, you realize that if you want to be successful, that's not going to cut it, and you really need to change that. And I think that's what I admire about some of these top pros is that discipline to do that, and to constantly be conscientious about what you're eating, how much you're eating, how to train, how to recover, not going out till 2, 3 in the morning because you have to go to sleep and you have to recover to train the next day. Those are all very admirable to do, because they don't just do them once in a while. I mean, they're literally doing that for years on end to compete at that high level.
Yeah, I always find that fascinating. And even sometimes I look at clients who enjoy training and some of them who, let's say, have more competitive aspirations. And then you kind of compare that to what they're doing now. And I think it's sometimes hard to emphasize that if you want to be the elite of the elite, what you said is it's kind of all-encompassing. And you can argue if that's healthy or not healthy, but high-level sports has never really been about health, period. So
yes,
I think just not only the physical, but just the mental day in and day out. And I remember listening to interviews with, Dorian Yates talking about what he did and, just all the social things that you sort of miss out on, but yet you're trying to somewhat lead a normal life per se. And yeah, I just think that's probably one of the most difficult aspects that's very much underappreciated.
No, absolutely. It's one of those things that you just don't understand the obsessive component. And I think most top level athletes would, and I'm talking, Olympic caliber, pro caliber, people always say, I want to lead a balanced lifestyle, but, talk to anybody successful at anything. And I don't think there's a lot of balance in anybody that's really at the top of their game. You have to sacrifice a lot to be that, at that elite level. And no matter what you do, if it's your profession, financial, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes to that elite level, unless you're going to just be one of those lucky bastards that wins the lottery or something, right? But the way it works really is with sport. I mean, there's obsession, and with bodybuilding, that's kind of taken to the next extreme, because now it's really, how you lead your lifestyle. Like personally, I would actually say that my bodybuilding lifestyle. So I'm going to be personal here, but I've actually been married 4 times, and I would say I would verge to say that probably 3 of those, my first 3 marriages, a lot of what kind of inked on that was that obsession over that bodybuilding life. Certainly my second and third, were partly as a result of that very selfish, very fatiguing lifestyle that, they can hang with for a little bit, but, when they see you doing it again and again and again, and it's never ending, it can be very, very challenging. And I think that can be fatiguing. So there's a lot of personal sacrifice that goes on. Bodybuilding is a very selfish sport, where, all you really kind of look is, it's all about you, and it can be very difficult to see that when you're in the moment trying to accomplish those things as a bodybuilder.
Yeah, because from the outside looking in, I think people just always see snapshots of any athletic endeavor. Bodybuilding's, I think, no different from that, right? So we have the Olympics coming up, and you see all these amazing performances, and then you realize even if you're a first-time competitor, you probably started training very young, with some sports, gymnastics, extremely young. And then you've got a 4-year cycle of training and everything that goes into it that leads up to, for some athletes, like a single event. That to me is just, it's crazy.
Exactly. I think Usain Bolt actually said it best. He said something like, I spent, 8 years training to run, 9 seconds. And, and that's kind of the reality of it. And, with a lot of these athletes, it's just that one single thing for that pinnacle. And when you see those people, and we only appreciate the ones that get those medals, right? But what about all the other ones that just to get there?
Yeah.
Forget getting a medal. Just to get there and be able to compete at that level is an incredible feat and an incredible sacrifice. And bodybuilding really is no different, but I would say even to compete, at the regional level, yeah, you can still step on stage and maybe not sacrifice so many things, but to really compete well and get a top 15 placing, a top 10 placing at a national level show, you've put in some sweat equity in there, and you've sacrificed a lot to do that.
Yeah. Talk about some of the training. Did you find a big difference coming from a athletic background? Did you see faster gains when you switched to more of a bodybuilding style of training? Was it radically different? And then do you think having a more athletic background kind of set you up to be in a better position once you did switch to more bodybuilding focused training?
Yeah, I think the training is completely different. It was actually completely foreign to me, because I never, I would do, for example, a biceps and a tricep exercise as part of my my routine. But that was kind of like an afterthought, kind of like a fill-in exercise. It wasn't something that I would emphasize. And certainly, like, to add different varieties and work the muscle in different angles, and why I was going to, change the angle, and why I was going to do different variations of that, or how am I going to do this lat pull down, and why am I going to use an overhand versus an underhand versus a wide grip versus a close grip, and why would I implement that? Before it's like, I'm going to do a pull down or a pull up, and that's just kind of going to hit the back. But in bodybuilding, it's way more intricate than that. You have to kind of get into the, why am I going to vary it? Why am I going to use maybe a single hand versus a double hand? So an isolated exercise, and how am I going to position my body? How am I going to execute that exercise? And so the training is definitely very different, and it's one of those things where you don't really appreciate that until you're kind of further along, particularly because when you're first starting, your body just responds, just the changing from, a relatively lower volume, higher intensity to a relatively higher volume type style training. Your body will adapt to that. But then as you start progressing further and you're trying to now, you're reaching that, you're getting that to that ceiling effect where, you're maybe reaching closer to your genetic potential. Now to gain an extra, 3 pounds of muscle, 5 pounds of muscle, it's freaking ridiculously hard. And not only that, but to add it where you want to add it, and to be symmetrical with the rest of your physique, that there's an art to that. So it's kind of blending that science and the art to be able to do that, and how you select your exercises, why you select your exercises, and also what works best for you and your physique. How to prioritize your training. It's definitely very different. But I will say that athletic background did help me prepare for that a little bit better, because you have a little bit more of that just kinesthetic awareness, and you're able to pick up different movement patterns. If you can, somebody cues you on how to alter your physique or your posture or your positioning, you just have more kinesthetic awareness. So I think you're able to pick up a lot of these nuances, whereas when you don't have that background, and that can be really hard, I think it makes it difficult. Not only that, but the discipline behind that too. I always remember back to my 7th grade, 8th grade junior high school football coach in Texas in the heat, the discipline that they taught me, and just gutting through. And I could still hear that coach yelling in my ear, you gotta want it. He would say, you gotta want it. And we'd be running in the heat. And I kind of put that same train of thought into my training when you're trying to give up in that set. So all of those things combined, I think, really help you in being successful to kind of push through and grunt to make things happen as a bodybuilder.
Do you find some body parts can just take more, I don't want to say the word abuse, but more volume with higher frequency? Like, one thing I've noticed, and again, I don't coach a lot of high-level physique athletes, a few here and there, but vast majority of my clients are looking for more muscle mass, performance, better body comp. So it's all kind of similar principles per se. I find, like, for like the back, not so much low back, but like just upper back, to keep it very general, most people can take a pretty high amount of volume and recover. I don't necessarily find that that's true for other, I guess, if we split it into body parts. Have you found something kind of similar, that you've kind of changed your training, or you would advise people to maybe modify some stuff they're doing?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is truth to that. There are some muscle groups that are just going to be able to handle more volume and be able to recover a little bit faster. So I think it comes to mind for me is biceps, triceps, calves. They tend to you can actually train those with fairly good frequency, and they tend to recover fairly well. But trying to do the quads that way, or the leg complex in general, not with your calves aside, you really can't do some high volume, high intensity type of training. And that being said, in addition to, there are some inter-individual variability with that, into who can handle some of that. But I will say that definitely in bodybuilding, that's kind of thing that's cool is, you don't just train, when you begin training, you maybe if you're kind of somewhat don't have a lot of development, you can kind of train some things equally. But then as you start developing and you start seeing, you know, what you genetically are going to develop easier than others, then you have to tweak your program, because otherwise you're going to develop a lot of asymmetries over time. And one thing that I did say that I do miss actually as a bodybuilder, I always say this is the better bodybuilder I've become, the worse athlete I have become. So because I was a sprinter, you know, so you know I ran a 10/8500.
Oh damn, that's good.
Under 22 seconds in the 200, under 50 seconds in the 400.
Oh, nice.
And and now, you know, it's like if I run the 100, you need a calendar. It's like it takes you 1.2 days to do that. And I miss being fast. I miss being super explosive. Even though I won't. Part of it is my fault. I do stretch, but I don't emphasize a lot of flexibility in my training, even though I've had to implement that more as I get older. But with all of that, part of it is a result of me just not prioritizing these things. But I've definitely felt that I haven't been able to be as explosive. So even though I'm really strong, I'm definitely not as explosive. You know, I don't sprint very fast. You know, I can't change direction very fast, just because I don't prioritize that into my training really at all.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I always have this discussion with clients too of, I think there may be some merit if you want to be the best bodybuilder known to man, that you're probably going to have to give up some athletic performance. But usually when I dig a little bit deeper with clients, even with myself, most people probably don't want to give that up entirely. So I think it's a good point in a discussion, even for people just to think about of, you know, how far down one path do they want to go, and, you know, again, what are some of the costs associated with that?
Yeah, because it definitely plays a role, and not only that, you know, just carrying so much excess body weight on your frame, you know, it does take its toll, even if it is, you know, muscle mass that you're carrying around. I mean, man, you feel it walking around. And you know, I think the heaviest I've been, I told you I'm 5'5" with shoes on, but the heaviest I've been is 230.
Wow.
And I was a fluffy 230. I wasn't a very lean 230, but I've been a fairly lean 210, and even that is challenging. And you know, right now I walk around at about 205 pounds. I think my body fat is somewhere, you know, in the off season, you know, between 11 and 13% very typically. So even then, you know, it's like, man, it's like I definitely feel it. I actually feel better. You know, I really have to kind of diet down and be, you know, single digit body fat, you know, to really kind of feel not so achy. And even though I'm fairly lean, but still, I still have all that body weight, you know, carrying 200 pounds at a 5'4", 5'5" frame. That's a lot of body weight.
Yeah, definitely. Briefly on nutrition, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the drugs and other effects that go into it. But I'm always curious, like, what was, for you personally, like the highest amount of calories you got to in the off season?
Yeah, well, I would say probably when I did some dirty bulks back in the day.
Everybody's done that.
Yeah, because you kind of have to, right?
At some point, it's a requirement almost.
Exactly. So I would say, you know, I got to consistently eating between 5,000 and 6,000 calories on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, that was quite challenging. And now, of course, you know, over the years, I find it's like, you know, I don't really need to go that high. You know, and I, even in my off season, you know, if I'm trying to bulk, I typically go maybe, you know, 5, maybe 10% over what I actually need. And I can grow just as effectively that way without having to lose all that body fat. But yeah, I mean, regardless, even then, I mean, that's still a lot of food, because I mean, I diet on 2,900 calories.
Oh,
so
that's
my
pretty
maintenance
high.
is, yeah, my maintenance is about 33, 34. So even if I add 10% for that, you know, it's still quite a bit of food.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think I remember for the highest I ever got up to that I was able to do, you know, consistently was between 3,500 and 4,200, and it didn't work so well. I just got fat. But for a period of time, just doing that, just trying to eat like even just whole food, it's like nonstop, and your grocery bill gets high. And I think people underestimate, and Phil's talked about this on the show, and Lonnie has too, that the first couple of weeks are great, and then after that, you don't want to have any more staring contests with your bowl of white rice, and it gets kind of old pretty fast.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. It gets fast to try to get all that food down, especially when you're trying to get it, like you said, from whole food sources. You can only do so much, chicken and rice and potatoes and of course you try to get your vegetables in there, which actually makes it really hard.
Yeah,
harder to get all that in, especially when you're trying to get all that protein in addition to all the other calories. It's so satiating. I mean, man, it becomes very challenging. And you did mention something. It's that grocery bill. I remember. My grocery bill. Even my wife and I now. I think we spend about $1,000 a month on grogroceries. And
I believe that.
And that's the two of us. It's crazy.
Yeah. So transitioning into some of the aspects, at least from the pharmaceutical side, at what point do you think people should at least consider doing that? Because I don't think it's any shocker that at the elite level, drugs are a big part of it, as they are in almost any sport.
Right.
But my pet peeve is people who kind of look at that as sort of the answer as to why they're not where they're at. And usually most of the time when I hear these conversations, it's, somebody who's been training in the gym like less than a year. And I'm just like, just go away, go train for 5, 10 years or something. Maybe I'm this old curmudgeon-y guy now. And then maybe consider it at that point. And even then, I'm just like, do you have any sort of rules of thumb when people should at least look into it more, or at least start having those conversations? Because to me, it seems like those things happen at a very uneducated level, and they happen way too early.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think even a lot of people that aren't in the field, will say, oh, you're just that big because you take the drugs. And they don't see the other, components. And yeah. I always see, I don't know if you read the book, but Spitting in the Soup is a great book.
I have not.
Oh, it's great. It talks about, basically how the doping has kind of been put under the rug, but yet, we want to see all the Olympic records broken, right, and we want to compete. And it really talks about the politics, the economics, and the drugs themselves, and kind of where we are in the state of affairs today. But it's a great book that kind of highlights some of these things. And what I often see is, people think, they describe it in the book as people think that the communists were beating us Americans in the 1960s and 70s only because of the drugs, but they didn't realize that was only one brick out of the whole wall that they were doing. It's like they had invested in exercise physiologists, and they were doing periodization before we knew what it was. They were doing weight training before we knew what it was. So they were doing a lot of these other things first. And yeah, drugs were part of it, and kind of that's what I always go with bodybuilding is, at the high level, drugs are part of it, but you need to make sure you have all these other things done correctly. And I agree with you 100%. If you haven't been in the gym, at least 2-3 years, and not just in the gym, but doing in the gym, dotting your I's and crossing your T's consistently for 2 or 3 years, I think you have no business at all doing any sort of drug. During that time, you should be focusing on, am I eating consistently? Am I eating enough? Am I balancing the right type of macronutrients and micronutrients? Am I training, with enough frequency, with enough intensity? Is my training program right? Am I recovering well? Am I leading this lifestyle? And because then and only then, if you're not doing all those major things first, the drugs are, of course, going to work, but they don't work to the level that they could, and you kind of shoot yourself in the foot because you don't know how far you could have gone without the drugs doing all those things right. And I think it's actually a sad state of affairs when people kind of dive into that, very, very early. My son's actually into powerlifting and bodybuilding, and that's something that I instilled into him. So now he's 23, but he's got a solid of 7 years of lifting, and he's still a natty. And I'm very proud of him for doing that, because he really has kind of he's put up some amazing numbers in powerlifting. He's competed in physique shows and done very well as a complete natural athlete. And it's not until now where I would probably say, if that was the road he chose and that's what he wanted to do, where I would probably say, okay, you've paid your dues, you've kind of done a lot of other things correctly. The other thing I want to make sure with any young athletes is, you need to be, financially stable, because it's expensive. Yeah. You need to have, medical insurance so you can go get your blood work done, or have the money to be able to pay for those things out of pocket, where you're getting, because you got to keep your health in mind. So not only are the drugs expensive, but they're also, you need to keep your health out there. So you want to make sure that you're getting things tested on a regular basis. I would say minimum 2, ideally 3 or 4 times a year. You want to get your blood work done to make sure you're not killing yourself. And not only that, but just being, I think, emotionally ready and mentally ready, mentally mature, because if you're not, it just sets up a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I think that the amount of some people I see who will take, in my opinion, kind of crazy choices with pharmaceuticals, and then do like the ostrich method of bury their head in the sand, where they don't even want to look at their HDL levels.
Right.
I'm like, the amount of stuff you're on your HDL, it may be single digits. Like, I think putting your head in the sand is not going to change it. Like, you should probably go in and get some blood work there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you're not monitoring that, then that could definitely be dangerous. And I would say, even when I started, because and I'm very open about this, but my first 2 years competing, I actually qualified for national level competition as a natural in the lighter weight classes as a bantamweight lightweight. But then when I got to the national level, I got my butt kicked as a natural competitor. Sure. And that's when I kind of decided, because I was actually anti-drugs for a couple of years. And then when I went to that USA championship, and I got, I don't know, 4th call out, it didn't feel good, and I had worked hard to get there, and I decided, okay, well, if I want to stay in this, be competitive in this, and really make a nudge at it, then I need to cross that bridge. And luckily, I've done a lot of research in those 2 years, but I was still not for it until right about that time. That's when I had my calling, I would say. But that being said, I've got about 18 years worth of time where I've been doing these things. And in early on, I would say I would still do blood work, but not as regularly as I should. And now that I've gotten older, that's become kind of a bigger priority, especially when you see some of these people that are dying in their 30s, their 40s. It's you really you want to be careful with how you're doing things. And I don't say that the drugs are 100% to blame, but I think it's just lack of paying attention, like you're saying, burying your head in the sand and not paying attention to all these other risk factors that you're exposing yourself to.
Yeah, and some of and who knows if they're true or not, some of the cycles you hear about, or people who have talked about it, at least appears to me that some of the high level pros who have gotten out and appear to be doing pretty good, like the two people always comes to my head is Dorian Yates and Ben Pakulski, that competed both at a high level and seem to be doing pretty good now. Probably picked a good time to get out, where you see some other people, especially younger people who appear to have good talent, probably genetic outliers, put in the work, and then you hear of some of the crazy stuff they do, and it just seems like, to me, with physiology, like if you're redlining the car, you just can't expect the car to go for a long period of time, right? It just looks like there's if you step on the gas that hard, you've got a limited runway to play with.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I think, and that's what I see a lot of the young guys that are coming out is they're they're so aggressive with what they're doing, and it's like you said, they're redlining all the way through. And you know, I mean, there's like Dallas McCarver is a good example.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the kid died at 26, 27.
Yeah.
And I remember taking him off stage at a pro show when I was doing the athletic training, sports medicine services, and you know, it's scary to see them doing some of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I always think that it comes down to, there's always these, and I don't participate in these weird debates online about who should do it, who not should do it, and it just seems like to me, it just comes down to more of a personal decision. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's a real clear delineation, right? Even if you look at what is considered a drug, right? I mean, caffeine is considered a drug, alcohol is a drug, you know, there's performance enhancing drugs, right? So it is somewhat, I think, arbitrary where you draw the line. And I think for an individual, that's just more or less a personal decision. Like for myself, like I don't even use HRT or anything. That's just my personal decision, but yet I drink coffee and I've gone to Costa Rica and done combo and ayahuasca and other stuff, you know, that it makes no sense from a physiologic assessment of what is a drug, what isn't. For me, it's just purely a personal decision. And if someone else wants to do something else, cool. It doesn't bother me. Each person, I think, has to make their own decision. I just hope that they do it in a very educated way where they've weighed the pros and the cons with it, because I just get nervous when I see what appears to be uneducated decisions. And the last component too is that with a lot of the stuff that high level competitors are doing, like we talked about at dinner, who knows what's going on, right? There's almost no research in that area to even try to have an educated conversation too. So there's just a lot of unknowns yet too.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, everything from where you draw the line and leaving it as a personal choice, you know, and I appreciate, you know, the non-judgmental approach you take, because I'm the same way, you know, and I follow the same thing, you know, even personally, even with other drugs, you know, whether
sure.
You know, marijuana or other, it's like, hey, you know, it's your body, you know, it's your decision, like, you know, choose to do you and I do me, and that's okay. But I agree that there is, you know, that lack of education, particularly in the performance enhancement drug component, where we see all of that, and we see it a lot. I know Rick Collins, he and I we talk quite a bit, and we actually he published a paper several years ago. We actually presented some of this at ISSN a while ago, but. One his paper that he published, it was in 2006 or 7. You know, that who's the primary user of these performance enhancement drugs, and you know, it's not an athlete. It's like a, you know, I think he described it from the surveys that they took of thousands of people. You know, the most common user is like a white male with a higher than average education in their early 30s, who's got a higher than average income. Financially stable with a family, and that's who's juicing, you know, for the most part.
And most of those are non-competitive athletes.
Yeah, and the reason they're doing it is just to look better naked, in a sense.
Yeah.
So they're not, you know, they're not there to win a trophy or to win the next Olympia. They just want to look better. But I think that's where we often see what you said, the lack of education in terms of what they're using and how they're using it and how much they're using. And in today's society now, I mean, it's especially in the United States, it's so hard to come by, you know, appropriate drugs. I mean, most of what you're going to find are going to be underground drugs. So, you know, how are they made? You know, how are they monitored? Well, they're not monitored. So where are you getting them from? Which is very scary. You know, they're not pharmaceutical grade. And of course, you can go to a physician and get some prescription, you know, if you're a candidate for that. But you know, the amount of drugs, first of all, they're not going to prescribe you super physiological doses. And secondly, the types of drugs that are available are somewhat limited. I mean, there's only a few that are legally allowed to be prescribed that are actually still currently made that you can purchase, as a pharmaceutical grade drug. So that leaves a lot of room for error, and the type of drug that you're getting, the dosages that you're getting. And you said one very important thing is we don't know what the effects of these are when you're taking them at, I think in research, the highest dosage I've seen that has been studied has been 600 milligrams a week of testosterone. And for a lot of bodybuilders, I mean, that's not a low dosage, but that's not a high dosage.
Right.
I know some bodybuilders who take double or triple that.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah, and then you add on top of that, they may not be monitoring blood work. They don't even have a physician they're working with. And the other part, too, is that I think most people know this, but if you go to your doctor, like, just for God's sake, like, find someone who's used to working with that and tell them what you're doing. I mean, they're not going to report you to the cops. You know what I mean? But if you're not informing them of everything that's going on, I think they're also dealing with an incomplete picture, and there's only so much they can do to help you at that point too. Granted, they're going to look at your blood work and, maybe freak out a little bit, but yeah, find someone you can trust who's used to dealing with that, and just have an honest conversation with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. And if you can't trust your doctor, then you need to find another doctor.
Exactly.
And also know the doctor that you're working with, and hopefully they're open-minded and educated enough in that to help you, because a lot of them are not, and that's okay. That's not their cup of tea, and they may not be used to dealing with that. Some of them may try to, hopefully they're not, but there are some people, they might try to steer you away, and that's not their role really. They can educate you and tell you that's kind of their goal. And that I think that's definitely something they should do. But, I think the component of not telling them anything, you're right, it leads for a very incomplete picture. Not only that, but I think a lot of people, and this is something that I'm interested in studying too, and Dr. Thomas O'Connor, he's an MD, I don't know if you know, but he's a great guy. He was a hardcore power lifter, dabbed into the anabolics aggressively for years on end, and went to medical school and studied that. But he works with a lot of patients, and he wrote a book, America on Steroids, which is very telling in terms of some of the way that a lot of patients who have used for many years and they've come off and they want to come off, and they maybe want to have a family, or maybe they just no longer want to use, they're often mistreated, not maliciously by doctors, just because a lot of the doctors don't know what to do or how to treat them. And that's his cup of tea, is really helping those individuals, because a lot of them, when he reports some of the case studies, is some of these people have been off the drugs, for a year, 2 years, even up to 10 years. And they've used the HCG, they've used the Clomid, but their testes no longer produce the testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
They no longer work. It's a long-term. So those individuals, they have to almost permanently be on HRT because their testes are no longer working. And that's something that's very real and very important. And if you're not treating that, then you're really mistreating that patient, because they're going to have all of those side effects associated with that. That's going to, lead to depression. It's going to lead to, muscle loss, potentially bone loss. It's going to, all of those, sexual dysfunction, all of those variables that come with low testosterone, and you just can't quit cold turkey. So having someone that you can work with that is really important.
Yeah, Dr. Eric Serrano has a lot of good information in that area too, and yeah, some crazy stories too.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time. We really appreciate it, and thank you for being so honest and open with everything. It's much appreciated. Where can people find more information? I know you've got some great stuff you put out on Instagram, but where can they find more information about you?
Awesome. Yeah, my Instagram handle is at Dr. GFit. So it's all spelled out, Dr. GFit spelled out. And that's my Instagram handle. And I do post a lot of stuff on, I really kind of keep it general. I post on some general health stuff, some bodybuilding specific stuff. general exercise stuff. I post some new studies that are interesting to me. Post a few personal things here and there, so I keep it fairly fresh and consistent, and that way intriguing for people to kind of read different things. So it's not just specifically for bodybuilders, but there is a lot of bodybuilding content in there for sure as well. And the other ways they can reach me is I'm an associate professor and a dean fellow for the College of Natural Sciences at Cal State San Bernardino. So you can find me on the university's website under our kinesiology department. So it's csusb.edu, and you can find me on our website there, or you can just Google my name, Guillermo Escalante Kinesiology, and you'll find my name there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community.
The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.